Night on a cliff on Okinawa, the spring of 1945. The company that climbed it that morning has been driven back over the edge, broken, leaving its wounded behind on the top. And on that top, alone in the dark, one man is still moving. He drags a wounded soldier to the lip of a sheer drop, ties a rope, and lowers him into the black toward friendly hands below. Then he turns around and goes back for another. He is not carrying a weapon. The place is the WWII escarpment, a wall of rock the soldiers have started calling Hacksaw Ridge. The man on top is a company medic named Desmond Doss, and he is doing the impossible by his own private rule. He carries no rifle, no pistol, nothing to kill with, because he believes he must never take a life. The rest of his company is at the bottom of the cliff. He is the only American still up there, in the dark, with the enemy. If forgotten history, told the way it actually happened, is what you came for, take 1 second and subscribe. Because how an unarmed man ended up alone on that cliff, saving the same soldiers who once called him a coward, is one of the strangest and bravest stories of the war. Now, back to the ridge. To understand it, you have to go back to a quiet town in Virginia, and a promise a young man made that he refused to break. By the spring of 1945, the war in the Pacific had reached Okinawa, and the fighting there was as terrible as anything the war had produced. In the middle of that island stood the escarpment, a sheer rock face hundreds of feet high, with a cargo net thrown over the top edge for men to climb. Whoever held the top controlled the ground for miles. The Japanese held it in strength, dug deep into caves and tunnels, and every American attempt to take it had been thrown back down the rock. Desmond Doss had grown up in Lynchburg, Virginia, in a devout family, and as a boy he had taken the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," and made it the center of his life. When the war came, plenty of men with his beliefs stayed home as objectors. Doss did the opposite. He wanted to serve, he wanted to be where the danger was, but he would not carry a weapon and he would not take a life. So he chose the one job that let him do both at once. He would go to war as a medic, to save men instead of killing them. He did not call himself a conscientious objector. He called himself a conscientious cooperator because he was not refusing to serve, he was refusing only to kill. But the army of 1942 had no patience for fine distinctions. To the men around him, a soldier who would not pick up a rifle was a problem, maybe a danger, certainly a coward. His refusal to carry a weapon and his refusal to work on his Saturday Sabbath marked him from the first day as the strangest man in the barracks. What followed was months of quiet cruelty. Men in his own unit mocked him, insulted him, and tried to break him into quitting. They threw shoes at him while he knelt to pray at night. Officers tried to get him discharged as unfit, then tried to court-martial him outright for refusing a direct order to carry a rifle. Through all of it, Doss did not fight back and did not give in. He kept his hands open, kept his faith, and kept insisting that he had come to save lives, not take them. In the end, the charges were dropped, and he shipped out for the Pacific with nothing but his medical bag and a small Bible his wife had given him. The men who had tormented him in training began to change their minds in combat. On Guam and in the Philippines, and then on Okinawa, they learned what it meant to have a medic who was utterly without fear for himself. When a man went down in the open, Doss went to him, every time, no matter the fire, because he believed each life was worth any risk to his own. The soldiers who had called him a coward started to notice that the strange, gentle man with no weapon was the bravest one among them. By early May, his division stood at the foot of the escarpment. The men climbed the cargo net hand over hand to the top of the cliff, out of the relative safety below into open ground swept by machine guns and mortars, where the enemy waited in hidden tunnels just yards away. The noise on that rock was beyond description, the air full of steel and dust and the cries of the hit. It was the kind of place a sane man would do anything to get away from. Doss climbed up into it, carrying nothing but bandages. For days the battle on the top went back and forth, the Americans gaining a few yards and losing them again, the wounded piling up faster than they could be carried down. Doss worked through all of it, crawling from man to man, dragging the hit out of the open, patching what he could, sending the rest down the net. He seemed to be everywhere at once. And then came the morning that would put his whole strange creed to the hardest test any man could face. The company went up the net at dawn and pushed out across the top, and for a while it looked like the ridge might finally be theirs. Then the ground itself seemed to come alive. The Japanese had let them come on, and now they counterattacked out of the tunnels in force, on every side at once, with a fury that stopped the Americans cold. Men began to fall all across the open rock. The attack broke, and the order came down the line that every soldier dreads. Fall back. Get off the top. Get down the cliff. The survivors scrambled back to the cargo net and went down it as fast as they could, leaving the top of the escarpment to the enemy. But they could not take everyone. Scattered across that exposed rock, in shell holes and behind broken stone, lay dozens of wounded men too badly hurt to move themselves, men who would be killed where they lay the moment the position was overrun. By every rule of survival, they were already lost. There was nothing to be done for them but to grieve them later. Desmond Doss did not go down the net. While the rest of the company climbed to safety, the one man with no weapon turned and went the other way, back out onto the top of the cliff, alone, toward the wounded. He had made a decision that made no military sense and perfect sense to him. He was not going to leave a single living man up there. He was going to get them out, all of them, by himself, with a rope and his 2 hands, with the enemy closing in around him. He worked out a way to do it. He took a length of rope and tied a special double knot he remembered from his childhood, looping it into a kind of sling he could fasten around a man's body. He dragged the first wounded soldier to the edge of the cliff, secured him in the loop, braced himself against a shattered tree stump, and lowered him hand over hand down the rock face to the men waiting below. And as he worked, he said a small prayer that he would repeat all day, the only thing he asked for. "Lord, please, help me get one more." Then he went back and got one more, and one more after that. For hours, the unarmed medic crawled out across the open top of Hacksaw Ridge again and again into ground the enemy now controlled, found a wounded man, dragged him to the edge, and lowered him to safety. Bullets cut the air around him. He kept moving anyway, refusing to think about the fire, thinking only about the next man and the next knot and the next few feet of rope. Each time he finished, he was sure he could not survive going back. Each time he went back. Below the cliff, the soldiers who had once thrown shoes at him stood and watched a miracle come down the rock, one rescued man at a time, lowered out of the smoke by a pair of hands they could not see. Some of them wept. The coward they had despised was, it turned out, the one man among them with the courage to walk back into hell for strangers, unarmed, and keep walking back until there was no one left to save. When it was finally over and someone tried to count, no one could quite agree on the number. Doss himself, embarrassed by the fuss, guessed he had lowered maybe 50 men. The officers who had watched insisted it was 100. In the end, the army split the difference and settled on an estimate that has stood ever since. In a single day, alone under fire, with a rope and a prayer, one unarmed man had saved an estimated 75 wounded soldiers off the top of that cliff. And there is a detail that says everything about the man. In the days of fighting on that ridge, the wounded Doss crawled out to help did not all wear American uniforms. Some of them were enemy soldiers, hit and bleeding and left in the open like everyone else. Doss treated them too. To him there was no such thing as an enemy wounded man, only a wounded man. The same conviction that would not let him take a life, would not let him walk past one, whatever flag it had been fighting under. The cliff was not the end of it. In the weeks of fighting that followed on Okinawa, Doss kept going out after the hit, and the war finally caught up with him. A grenade landed among a group of wounded he was tending and tore into his legs. Rather than call another medic out into the fire to get him, he treated his own wounds and waited. When litter-bearers finally came and carried him towards safety, he saw another man more badly hurt, rolled himself off the stretcher, and told them to take the other soldier first. While he waited again, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. He splintered the broken arm himself, using a rifle stock someone had left behind, the closest he ever came to holding a weapon, and crawled the rest of the way to the aid station under his own power. He had been on Okinawa for weeks of the worst fighting of the Pacific War, had saved more men than anyone could count, and had never once carried a thing to defend himself with. A few months later, in the autumn of 1945, Desmond Doss stood on the White House lawn while the President of the United States read his citation aloud and hung the Medal of Honor around his neck. He was the first conscientious objector in American history to receive it, the nation's highest award for valor given to a man who had refused to fire a single shot. The army that had once tried to throw him out for cowardice now held him up as one of the bravest men it had ever produced. He never grew comfortable with the word hero. The medal, he always said, belonged to the men who did not come home, and the only thing he had done was keep a promise and trust that he would be given the strength to keep it. He went back to Virginia and lived quietly for the rest of his long life, a soft-spoken man who had walked unarmed through the worst the war could throw at him, and had answered it only by saving lives. He had proven something the whole world had told him was impossible. That a man could go through the heart of a war, harm no one, and still be its greatest hero. Years later, a young soldier, frightened of his own coming war, asked him how an unarmed man finds that kind of courage. Doss thought a while, then he said, "I never set out to be brave. I just couldn't stand the thought of leaving a man behind, so I kept asking the Lord for one more, and he kept giving me one more. The rest of us do not need a rifle, or a war, to live by that. There is always one more person who needs helping. Reach the one in front of you. Desmond Doss did. Remember him. If your father, grandfather, or anyone in your family served as a medic or a corpsman in any war, leave their name in the comments and one life you know they touched. Not just a name, one life. The men Desmond Doss carried off that cliff would want it that way. Subscribe if you want the next story. There is always one more.